Is being nice actually kindness, or just a habit? Picture a simple situation. You're with people, at work, with friends, maybe even family. You try to be polite, not argue, not create tension, not ruin the mood. You agree, you smile, you smooth things over. On paper, you're doing everything right. You're a normal person, not toxic, not aggressive, not dramatic. But over time, a strange feeling shows up. People hear you, but they don't really listen. They ask for your input, but decisions happen without you. They call you nice, yet when it actually matters, you're quietly sidelined. And the worst part is, you can't point to the exact moment when things went wrong. On the outside, you're easy to deal with. On the inside, irritation starts to build. You catch yourself thinking, I treat people well, so why does this keep happening to me? And that's where a quiet inner conflict begins. Because technically, you have nothing to complain about. No one is yelling at you. No one is humiliating you. No one is openly pushing you around. Everything looks polite, almost invisible. The problem is that the word nice sounds like a compliment, but in real life it often describes not strength of character, but a survival strategy, not a choice, a reflex, a habit of being safe rather than real. And that habit forms so early that we stop noticing it. The most dangerous part is that being nice is constantly rewarded. You're praised when you don't argue. You're liked when you adapt. You're seen as easy when you stay quiet in moments that actually make you uncomfortable. And your brain draws a simple conclusion. This is safer. But safety and respect are not the same thing. And in this video, we're not talking about becoming rude or aggressive. We're talking about why excessive niceness slowly starts working against you, even when you never intended it to. At first glance, you're just a pleasant person. But if you look closer, this is a full psychological role. And it comes with a price, usually higher than it looks. Why nice people get quietly angry? There's one detail most people miss from the outside. People who constantly try to be nice almost always carry a low-level irritation inside them. Not rage, not explosions, just a quiet, sticky frustration that can last for years. It's hard to spot because on the surface, everything looks fine. You don't fight, you don't argue, you don't confront. But inside, a conversation never stops. Why am I adjusting again? Why am I agreeing when I don't want to? Why did I say it's fine when it clearly wasn't? And that inner dialogue never really ends. The most dangerous part is that this anger has nowhere to go. You can't aim it at anyone specific because technically no one did anything wrong. They just got used to you being easy. They accepted your ustupki as normal. And the anger turns inward, becoming exhaustion, sarcasm, passive aggression, or a constant sense of being undervalued. Many people start thinking the problem is them, that they're not trying hard enough, not helpful enough, not pleasant enough. And that's the trap. The more you try to be nice, the less reason others have to take you seriously. Not consciously, automatically. There's another detail people rarely talk about. When someone constantly suppresses their no, their yes, loses weight. It stops meaning anything. People sense this intuitively. Your agreement no longer feels like a choice. It feels like background noise. And that's where the paradox appears. You behave as correctly as possible, yet inside you feel less and less respected. Not because the world is cruel, but because, little by little, you're disappearing from your own boundaries. Quietly, without conflict, almost invisibly. Where the idea being nice is beneficial actually comes from, this belief rarely appears in adulthood. Most of the time it forms very early, or when we don't yet have language, choice, or an understanding of consequences. A child quickly learns a simple rule. When I'm easy, I'm praised. When I don't cause trouble, things go smoothly. When I adapt, I'm accepted. In families, it often sounds harmless. Don't argue. Be smarter. Just give in. You're the good one. At school, it becomes even clearer. Don't stand out. Don't create problems. Be like everyone else. Over time, the brain assembles these signals into one strategy. If I smooth things over, I'm safe. If I don't create tension, I won't be rejected. The problem is that this logic works well for survival, but poorly for adult life. The adult world runs on different rules. Respect is not given for obedience. It's built through boundaries, clarity, and the sense that the person in front of you has a position. But the nervous system doesn't update itself automatically. It keeps running the old program even when the environment has changed. You're no longer a child. You won't be punished for disagreement. But your body reacts as if the risk is still real. Your heart speeds up. Your tongue freezes. Saying yes feels easier than holding the pause. There's another important confusion here. Being nice is often mistaken for kindness. But they're not the same. Kindness is a choice. You can be kind and still be inconvenient. Nice behavior, on the other hand, is usually automatic. You don't even notice the moment you give in, and that's where the core substitution happens. You think you're acting mature and correct. But in reality, you're repeating a childhood avoidance strategy. It's not about relationships. It's about not losing approval. Next, we'll look at the real difference between kindness and convenience, and why other people sense that difference faster than you expect. The difference between kindness and convenience? On paper, the difference seems obvious. In real life, people confuse it all the time, especially those who are used to being nice. Kindness looks soft, but it has a backbone. Convenience also looks soft, but there's no backbone there. There's fear of losing connection. Imagine two people in the same situation. Both are asked to stay late at work. The first calmly says they can't today but can help tomorrow. The second smiles and says, sure, even though they're already angry inside and mentally canceling their evening. From the outside, they look almost identical. Polite, calm, reasonable. Psychologically, they're in completely different positions. In the first case, the person stays connected to themselves. They hear the request, check in, and make a choice. In the second, the choice happens automatically. Not because they want to help, but because saying no feels risky. And that difference is something others sense, even if they can't explain it. Convenience always sounds slightly apologetic. In the tone, in the pauses, in the extra explanations. It's as if you're justifying your right to exist. Kindness doesn't sound like that. There's no rush in it. No need to be accepted. And here's the paradox. People aren't drawn to those who try to be pleasant. They're drawn to those who are calm in their boundaries. Because with that person, it's clear where they stand. You can deal with them. They're predictable, not because they agree with everything, but because they're honest. When you're constantly convenient, you erase your own outline. It's hard to rely on someone who barely shows up. Not out of malice, but because the nervous system looks for clarity, and clarity comes from clear yes and clear no. Next, we'll move into an even more uncomfortable point: why the brain often reads convenience not as kindness, but as weakness, and draws very specific conclusions from it. Why the mind confuses acceptance with submission. The human brain is lazy. It constantly simplifies reality to make faster decisions, especially in social situations. It wants to quickly understand who it's dealing with and what to expect. And that's where automatic labels appear. When you regularly adapt, agree, and avoid setting boundaries, other people's minds draw an unconscious conclusion. This person won't resist. Not because you're weak or flawed, but because systems work through patterns. Repeated behavior turns into expectation. There's a thin line between "I'm accepted" and "this is how you can treat me." And that line disappears fast. Today you give in to avoid tension. Tomorrow it's seen as normal. The day after, any disagreement from you feels surprising or even irritating. Not because you suddenly became difficult, but because you broke an established script. The most painful part is that the person truly believes they're liked for being kind. But in reality, they've been placed into a convenient role. A role where they don't interfere, don't push back, and don't need to be considered. Other people's minds don't see cruelty here. They see efficiency. That's why the reactions are often so strange. When you say no for the first time, people don't hear it. When you insist, they see you as aggressive. Because in their mental model, you were always the one who agreed. Any deviation feels like a threat, not a boundary. And this is the key distinction. Acceptance means being seen as a whole person, including your limits. Submission means being accepted only as long as you're convenient. From the outside, they look similar. On the inside, they're completely different. Next, we'll look at how status is built, not through big gestures, but through small, everyday signals you send without even noticing. How status is built in tiny, invisible moments. When people hear the word status, they imagine something obvious: a title, authority, confidence in big moments. But that's not where status is actually decided. It's decided much earlier, in moments so small you usually don't register them as important. Think about how you respond when someone asks you for something. Not the answer itself, but the timing. Do you answer instantly, almost reflexively? No pause, no space. That split second matters more than the words. An immediate yes tells people your inner world is already open for negotiation. A short pause tells them something else entirely. You exist before the request. Or take how you explain yourself. Notice how often nice people over-justify. They don't just say no, they build a case. They give context. They soften. They reassure. And without realizing it, they send a signal. My boundaries need approval to exist. Other people don't consciously analyze this, but they feel it. Status is formed through these micro signals. Eye contact that doesn't rush, answers that don't apologize, silence that isn't nervous. None of this looks impressive on its own, but together they create a sense of weight, or the absence of it. Here's the uncomfortable part. You can be competent, kind, and intelligent, and still lose status purely through these details. Not because people judge you, but because their nervous system is constantly asking one question: can I lean on this person or will they fold? Being nice tends to erase friction everywhere. You smooth things out before tension even appears. And that feels polite, mature, safe. But it also removes the very signals that create presence. You don't stand out as stable, you stand out as flexible. And flexibility sounds positive, until it becomes your only defining feature. Because once people feel that you always adjust, they stop adjusting to you. Next, we need to talk about the belief that keeps this pattern alive. The idea that if you're easy to deal with, you'll naturally be valued. That belief feels reasonable, and it quietly does the most damage. The belief that quietly destroys your value. This belief feels so reasonable that almost no one questions it. If you're easy to work with, helpful, agreeable, and low maintenance, people will appreciate you. It sounds fair, almost mathematical. I make life easier, so life treats me better. But here's the first crack in that logic. People don't value what's easy. They get used to it. Comfort doesn't register as value for long. It turns into background, like good lighting in a room. You only notice it when it's gone. When you're consistently convenient, your effort stops looking like effort. It becomes expectation. You're not helping out anymore. You're just the one who always helps. You're not being generous, you're being predictable. And predictability without limits is not respect, it's function. Here's a question most people avoid. If your agreement costs you nothing, why should it mean anything to anyone else? Value requires friction, not conflict, friction. The possibility that you might say no, that your yes isn't automatic. Watch what happens when someone rarely refuses. Their presence becomes useful but light, pleasant but replaceable. People don't invest in what doesn't push back, not consciously, nervously. Their system doesn't register risk, and without risk, there's no weight. The real damage of this belief isn't external, it's internal. The more you give without limits, the more resentment builds. And instead of questioning the strategy, most people double down. They become even nicer, even easier, even more invisible. This is how convenience turns into self-erasure. Not suddenly, gradually. And the worst part? It all started from an idea that sounded morally right. Next, we need to talk about a paradox that frustrates a lot of people. Why politeness, even when it's overused, doesn't create closeness, but quietly erodes trust. Why too much politeness makes people uneasy. Politeness is supposed to be a social lubricant. It keeps things smooth. It prevents unnecessary friction. But when politeness becomes your default response to everything, something subtle breaks, and people feel it before they understand it. Here's the issue. Excessive politeness blurs your real position. Others can't tell whether you agree or you're just being agreeable, whether you're on board or simply avoiding tension. And when the mind can't locate your stance, it doesn't relax. It stays alert. Trust doesn't grow from constant harmony. It grows from clarity, from knowing how someone reacts when something doesn't work for them. If every response is soft, careful, and frictionless, your reactions stop carrying information. They sound safe but empty. There's another layer most people miss. Over-politeness often feels strategic, even if it's unconscious. It gives off the sense that you're managing the interaction rather than participating in it. And when people sense management, they stop offering real closeness. Think about who you trust in difficult situations. It's rarely the nicest person in the room. It's the one who can stay calm and honest when things get uncomfortable. Not loud, not rude, just clear. When you rely on politeness to keep relationships intact, you trade short-term comfort for long-term trust. People stay pleasant with you, but they don't fully lean in. They don't test ideas with you. They don't rely on you under pressure. And this creates a quiet contradiction. You become socially safe, but strategically irrelevant. Next, we need to look at how this dynamic doesn't just happen to you, how it's slowly trained into the people around you step by step, without anyone meaning to. How you unknowingly train people to cross your boundaries. Here's the part most people don't want to hear, because it removes the comfort of blaming others. The way people treat you isn't decided in one big moment. It's trained into them slowly through repetition. Think about the small times you let something slide. You didn't say anything because it felt awkward. You agreed because pushing back seemed unnecessary. You stayed quiet because it's not worth it. Each moment feels harmless, forgettable. But the human brain doesn't work with isolated events. It works with patterns. After a few repetitions, your flexibility stops being generosity and becomes expectation. People don't think they're being kind again. They think that's how this person works. And once a pattern sets in, it runs on autopilot. No malice required. This is why changing your behavior later feels so jarring. The first time you say no, it doesn't land as a boundary. It lands as a disruption. People are confused, sometimes irritated, sometimes defensive. Not because you're wrong, but because you broke an unspoken agreement that you helped write. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people aren't exploiting you. They're responding to the role you've consistently played. A role where you absorb discomfort so others don't have to. A role where you adapt first, explain later, and rarely push back. Over time, this role becomes sticky. The longer you stay in it, the more effort it takes to step out. Not because others are cruel, but because systems resist change. Especially systems that benefit from your silence. This is how people wake up one day feeling disrespected, without being able to name a single moment where it happened. Next, we need to talk about what this does to you internally when it goes on for years. Because the real damage doesn't show up in relationships first, it shows up inside. What suppressed resentment slowly turns into. Resentment doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just changes shape. And the longer it stays unspoken, the less recognizable it becomes. Even to you. At first, it feels like tiredness. You're not angry, you're just drained. Then it turns into irritation at small things, a tone, a request, a look. You start reacting stronger than the situation deserves, and you don't quite understand why. Here's what's happening. Every time you override yourself to keep things smooth, you create internal friction, and because you don't express it outwardly, it turns inward. You start resenting the people around you, and almost immediately you resent yourself for feeling that way. This is where behavior gets confusing. You're still polite, but colder. You still help, but with less presence. Some people become sarcastic. Others disengage quietly. Some suddenly explode over something trivial, shocking everyone around them. From the outside, it looks like a personality shift, but it's not a shift. It's pressure finding an exit. The most damaging part isn't what this does to relationships. It's what it does to your sense of self. You lose clarity. You stop knowing whether you're agreeing because you want to or because you're afraid not to. Your internal compass gets blurry. And when your inner signals are unclear, Other people feel it. They don't trust the stability of someone who doesn't trust their own reactions. Not consciously, nervously. This is why resentment is so dangerous when it's suppressed. It doesn't just poison connection. It erodes self-respect from the inside. Next, we'll look at why this dynamic shows up so clearly at work, and why the people who carry the most resentment are often the ones doing the most for everyone else. For why nice people are rarely promoted, and rarely heard. At work, this pattern is especially clear, as there's always someone who helps everyone out, takes on extra tasks, covers gaps, stays late when needed. People rely on them in emergencies. They're appreciated verbally. But when it comes to promotions, influence, or real decision-making, someone else is chosen. It feels unfair. The logic seems obvious. I try hard, I'm reliable, I don't cause problems. But that's exactly where the trap is. Reliability without boundaries turns you into a function. You become a useful tool, not a figure people have to reckon with. Managers, teams, people in general need to know who can hold tension, who can say something uncomfortable, who won't dissolve under pressure. And when someone is always convenient, doubt creeps in. Will they push back when needed? Will they defend a decision? Will they hold their ground? The same thing happens outside of work, in friendships, in relationships, in groups. The nice one gets asked to help, but rarely gets asked what they think. They're listened to politely, but not followed. Their presence is pleasant, but not defining. Here's the uncomfortable part. When you constantly adapt, you're quietly communicating that your opinion doesn't carry much weight, and people take you at your word. Not because they're cruel, but because you set the frame. Next, we'll move into an even subtler area, the illusion of moral superiority that sometimes hides behind the identity of "I'm just a good person." The illusion of moral superiority. This part is especially uncomfortable because it touches identity. Many people who live in "I'm just a nice person" mode eventually start feeling quietly superior to others. Not openly, not consciously, but internally, as in, I try harder. I don't cause conflict. I behave properly. It rarely shows up directly. It sounds more like, I would never do that, or, well, it's easy for them to be rude, or, at least my conscience is clean. And here's the subtle substitution. Instead of acknowledging fear of conflict or rejection, the mind chooses a more pleasant explanation: moral high ground. The problem is that this illusion fixes nothing. It doesn't restore respect. It doesn't increase influence. It doesn't improve relationships. It only protects self-esteem from an uncomfortable truth: that many nice choices are driven not by kindness but by fear of losing connection. Others feel this too. When someone behaves too correctly, there's tension around them. It becomes hard to be honest. Any sharp move nearby suddenly feels wrong. People either distance themselves or stop taking that person seriously. The most dangerous part is that moral superiority locks the role in place. If I'm good and right, then nothing needs to change. The problem must be outside. And that's exactly what prevents seeing how the habit of being nice continues to quietly erode status and respect. Next comes the climax. The hardest and most freeing to ease insight in this entire topic. The uncomfortable truth about what people really respect. This is usually the moment where people feel a quiet resistance inside, because the truth doesn't flatter the image of being a good person. People don't respect politeness by itself. They don't respect constant agreeableness. And they don't respect someone who adapts at any cost. They respect inner stability, not dominance, not aggression, stability. The sense that the person in front of them won't disappear the moment things get tense. That they won't bend just to keep the room comfortable. That they can tolerate a bit of discomfort without losing themselves. Here's the part most people don't want to admit. When you're overly nice, you signal without words that harmony matters more to you than truth, that being liked matters more than being clear. Other people don't judge this morally. Their nervous system simply registers it. And nervous systems don't lean on what collapses easily. That's why in critical moments, people gravitate toward those who aren't the most pleasant, but the most grounded. Not the loudest, not the rudest, the ones who can hold their position when there's friction in the air, who don't rush to smooth things over just to feel safe again. This often feels unfair. You might think, but I'm trying to be decent. And you are. But respect isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a response to perceived solidity, to the sense that there's something firm behind the words. Here's the hardest part. You can't negotiate respect with niceness. You can't earn it by being low maintenance. The more you try to be inoffensive, the more invisible you become. Because respect doesn't grow from accommodation. It grows from clarity. And that raises a disturbing question. If this is true, what have you actually been trading away by staying nice for so long? What you quietly give up by staying nice. At first glance, staying nice looks like a safe deal. You avoid conflict. You don't burn bridges. You keep things calm. Nothing dramatic seems to be lost. And that's exactly why this cost is so hard to notice. What you give up first is your no. Not openly, but internally. It starts to feel heavy, risky, something that requires justification. So you begin shaping your life around situations where you won't need it. Fewer confrontations, fewer demands, less friction, more comfort, and less agency. Then you give up the weight of your words. When you constantly adjust, you slowly stop believing your opinion has impact. You still speak, but you don't expect to be followed. Others sense that lack of expectation, not because they're cruel, but because confidence leaks through behavior. You also give up real connection. Excessive niceness creates clean, polite relationships, but shallow ones. People interact with your agreeable version, not with you. They don't know where you stand, so they never fully meet you there. And there's a deeper loss that rarely gets named. You give up inner coherence. When you repeatedly choose harmony over honesty, something splits inside. Not dramatically, quietly. You feel slightly misaligned with your own life, as if you're watching it rather than living it. This is the real price of niceness, not rejection, not conflict, but the slow erosion of self-respect hidden behind the appearance of being easy to deal with. And once you see that cost clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. How it all fits into one picture. If you rewind and look at the entire chain, it becomes almost mechanical. An early habit of being convenient turns into an automatic response. That automatic response sends signals. Those signals train others. Others respond. And you end up with a result that feels unfair, but logically follows from the behavior. There are no villains here, no victims, just a strategy that once helped and later became outdated. It still protects you from conflict, but it no longer protects you from being devalued. And the longer you rely on it, the harder it is to see that it's the source of the problem. One thing matters here. This isn't about becoming harsh or unpleasant. It's about recognizing that pleasantness without clarity stops working. Without boundaries, kindness loses its shape and turns into background noise. When a person doesn't define themselves, the world can't orient around them. Not because the world is cruel, but because it needs structure. And if you don't provide that structure, it will be filled in for you, usually not in your favor. The most valuable shift here is awareness. Not dramatic change, not confrontations. Just noticing where you act from choice and where you act from inertia, where you're kind and where you're simply afraid of being inconvenient. And now it makes sense to ask yourself a few questions, not to force change, but to start seeing yourself more honestly. Questions worth asking yourself. These questions aren't meant to give you the right answers, and definitely not to make you feel guilty. They're meant to help you notice moments that usually slip past unnoticed, because this entire topic lives in those small moments. In what situations do you say yes most often, and then feel irritated with yourself afterward? Not in theory, very concretely. Who do you automatically adjust to without even checking whether you actually want to? And what do you feel right after? Relief or quiet resentment? When was the last time you said no without long explanations or justifications? Not harshly, not dramatically, just calmly. And what actually happened afterward? Not what you feared would happen. This is often where the gap between imagination and reality becomes obvious. Are there people in your life around whom you're always careful, restrained, and polite, but never really alive? Where you interact not out of interest, but out of obligation to be good? And what do you lose by keeping that dynamic going? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they're not about circumstances. They're about your role in what's happening. But that's exactly where choice begins. Not instantly, not forcefully, just gradually. And at this point, it's important not to rush ahead, not to try to become someone else overnight. Just to note one thing, maybe being nice isn't a personality trait. It's a role. And roles can be stepped out of when you're ready. A quiet ending, without slogans. If you felt a slight tension while listening to this, that's normal. This topic rarely leaves people untouched because it's not about behavior, it's okay? It's about how you relate to the world. There's no simple takeaway like, stop being nice and everything will change. That's not how this works. Being kind isn't the problem. The problem starts when kindness stops being a choice and turns into a reflex. When you agree faster than you can check what you actually want. When silence feels more dangerous than honesty. When convenience becomes the price of acceptance. Respect doesn't come from correct words or polite gestures. It appears where a person stays themselves even when it's uncomfortable. Not aggressively, not demonstratively, just calmly, without apologies, without the need to be liked. You might not need to change anything right now. Sometimes it's enough to start noticing the moments where you disappear, where you say yes out of fear, not desire, where you smooth things over not to create peace, but to avoid tension. If this video helped you recognize yourself in even one situation, that's already enough. What comes next is a personal choice. to keep playing a familiar role, or to slowly return the right to be not only pleasant, but real. You can write in the comments if this resonated with you, or just sit with the thought. Sometimes silence after a conversation like this works better than any advice.